Good morning and welcome to Vocal Intuition Live. I'm Anne Leatherland and I'm a vocal trainer and personal growth coach. And I work with professional voice users. So that's anyone who works with their voice for a living. You could be a singer, a speaker, a therapist, a teacher, a business person who uses their voice a lot from day to day. I'm here to help you. Today I'm going to be thinking about change. It's spring and everything's changing. We're at the Easter weekend, so Easter itself is all about change, transformational change, in fact, and new life. And so I've been thinking about this from the point of view of ourselves and our lives and our voices as well. If you're watching this morning, do pop in and make a comment if you're finding it interesting. Ask a question. I'll be quite happy to answer you. Or if you're watching on the replay, just do the same thing and put #replay. So changes, transformational changes. These can often lead us to better things, albeit with a little bit of pain and effort along the way. So why do we resist them, even though we know that changes can help us? Can you think of a time, for instance, when you went through a period of change? And when you look back now, you know that it was a good thing. It was something that really helped you. There was a bit of learning that went on. It can either be in your life or as part of your voice work, whatever it happens to be. But at the time, it didn't seem like a good thing. I think very often changes are a bit like that, aren't they? Especially when changes seem to land on us for no apparent reason. So for the past year, we've all been dealing with COVID and the changes as a result of that, for instance. And I know that there will be a lot of people who've been adversely affected by this, but I think most of us can say we've learned something. There's been something that we've taken from it, if not only the way that we've had to change our work and to find new ways forward. Because after all, change is the only constant thing. I'm just going to repeat that. Change is the only constant thing that we know. Everything changes all the time. In the universe, it's physics. Think about that. Nothing stays the same forever. Not even something seemingly solid. How old can I get? The pyramids. They've still changed over time. Changes happen, albeit very slowly. And we change all the time, and our voices change all the time. You may not think so because as we get older, those changes can be imperceptible. But for instance, think back to when you were 10 years old. Your voice is different now to how it was then. Your voice is different now if you're over 25 to how you were when you were younger. And if you're postmenopausal like me, then your voice will be changing again as you go into that phase of your life. So voices do change and voices can be changed. We can change them in good ways, and obviously we can change them in not so good ways, but hopefully we're thinking about the good ones here. Why do we then resist changes until they become unavoidable? Let me give you an example. If you know me, you'll know that I've been suffering from sciatica this week and it's been jolly painful, I can tell you. I have had to change my routine. I've had to change my way of working. I've even had to change my sleep routine because I can't get more than about 4 hours sleep because this is too painful. So I've had to start napping in the day just until I can see my way out of this problem. I'm going to have to change the way I approach walking, my alignment, the way I approach working at the desk. All of these things might have had an influence on this issue. And could I have changed that sooner? Well, probably. I mean, this thing's been grumbling away for several months and I never thought anything about it. Maybe if I'd realised earlier on, I could have made changes that would have avoided the level of pain that I've been in over the past few days. And that's the point, isn't it? We often ignore the change. We don't go for it because it seems easier to carry on as we are. We sort of ignore it. And we really ought to pay attention to those messages that our body is giving us. Now, that's just one example. Good morning, Jessa. Great to see you. Good morning, Lindsay. Happy Easter to you too. Nice to see some of you here this morning. Do chip in if any of this is resonating with you. Why do we resist the changes? Well, we're creatures of habit, and we also fear changes. Fear is a bit of a strong word, but actually it's to do with the way that our brains and our nervous system work together. Change is flagged up to the brain as possibly something that might be dangerous. So therefore, we're naturally a bit cautious about change. It's just as well to be aware of this. If you're a teacher, your students might be a little bit nervous of change. They might want to change, but they might be afraid of doing it because who knows where it will lead. And this is quite natural. As a teacher trying out something new, you might feel the same way, or if you're doing some studying for yourself. If you're a speaker and you have to speak in a new place, it can have the same result. You feel afraid. It's not what you're used to. You usually speak to smaller audiences, or you're usually in the boardroom or whatever, and all of a sudden you're on a big stage. And so change is something that will flag up to our nervous system and our brain as something to look out for. That doesn't mean that we can't do it and that we can't get good things from it. Morning, Jackie. Great to see you here as well. I asked a question earlier on. You might have missed that. Can you think of a time when you had a change, when something changed in your life and it didn't seem a great thing at the time, but when you are looking back now, you can see that it's helped you a lot? I'd love to know the answer to that question today. Things that you look back on and think, well, actually, yes, that was good. It was good that it worked out that way, even though it didn't seem so at the time. Also, what changes do you avoid? What changes do you avoid in your life, or have you avoided? I think we all avoid things as we go along. It seems easier to keep the status quo, and yet change is the only thing that's happening ever. The only constant thing in the universe. If you're liking this, give me a few hearts, people. I need a bit of support this morning. It would be really nice to see a few of those. What about your voice then in more detail? Well, we worry about our voices for exactly the same reasons. We may want to change them, but we're afraid of changing them because we have our habits, we have our way of doing things, and if we change those things, then what if it's not as good? Yeah, what if it's not as good? What if it doesn't represent us anymore? What if people don't like us anymore, or like our singing, speaking, presenting, whatever it happens to be, acting? And we'll all have our own habits with the way we use our voices and the way we practice our work. What are your habits? Do they work for you? Could you possibly make some changes which would help you to do things better? Or is there a bit of fear there? Or simply that you just don't want to change the habit? You know, it's an easy thing to say, change the habit, but we all know habits can be difficult to break. Also now, we tend to make comparisons between ourselves and others. That can be other teachers, other singers, other speakers. And we think that if we try and make changes, then it will be too great a thing for us to cope with. We couldn't possibly be as good as XYZ person, so therefore why bother? We are as we are, that's what we've got, why bother trying to make changes? We just assume that we can't. And yet, like this year, sometimes change has been forced upon us and we've done it. How many of you out there were not very tech savvy at the beginning of this lockdown phase? Had never used Zoom, had never done an online call. And now I know an awful lot of teachers like myself are just doing that all the time. And they've done it because they've had to. They often say necessity is the mother of invention, don't they? I think it's the mother of all change as well. And so we could do those things. Perhaps we resisted them for other reasons. Jackie's saying change has been great for her this year. That's super. And Lindsay, lockdown has brought enforced changes for the positive that perhaps she wouldn't have made. That's exactly the point. We resist and resist, don't we? Or sometimes we don't even think that changes can be made. And then suddenly, when they are, and the universe does its thing and everything changes naturally. I'm talking about the universe, by the way, from a physics point of view and from a more esoteric point of view. But it is true. In the universe out there, change is the only thing that we can count on. And so, why not make the best of it? And then we can look back at those times of changes in our lives and say, well, something good did come from it. Now, don't get me wrong. I know there are times when changes seem almost, what's the word? I was going to say insoluble, but like we can't get over them. And I've often thought that in my life, really quite big changes, quite serious things. And yet, even now, I can say, when I look back on those things, although they were very painful at the time, I can see something that has come from that that's made me stronger, made me better. I might not be still very happy about that change, but there's something somewhere. Lindsay, Zoom has been a big change for me and opened up training avenues I know I wouldn't have been able to fit into my previous schedule. Absolutely. It means that we suddenly can speak to people all around the world. Now, I was doing online work before we had all the lockdown and the COVID issue, but I'm doing it much more now, and I know much more about it and how to make it work. And I've changed my way of teaching and training so that it works on these systems. And if at some point I have to learn another system, for instance, I don't tend to do Microsoft because I have a Mac, I might have to learn Teams or something else if somebody requires it. So we have to be open to that. And we have to be open to the bigger changes that come into our lives as well. Perhaps as well as making comparisons and not thinking that we can do things, we think about past changes that maybe we consider weren't so good. And sort of what if that happens again? So, for instance, I tried that with my voice a couple of years ago and it didn't really work and I didn't feel good about it. So I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to try that change again. And yet, who's to say that the next time will be the same as the last time? The past is better where it is, that is, in the past, just left alone. I find it, we're better just living in the now and saying, well, you never know, if I give that another go and maybe think about it differently, get my mindset right, get my plan right, then the change this time might be more positive for me. And then I'll be able to look back and say of the first incidents that actually that was a learning thing. That was a learning opportunity. And I don't want to sound glib here, but very often when we trip up and fall over flat on our faces, that's what's going on. We've got learning going on. And again, if you're a teacher, you know that this is going to be vital for your students. They need to understand that it's okay to go wrong, to make mistakes, and to try and make changes that sometimes will not work. But they will learn something from it, and that in itself is the biggest change. How are we doing, people? Any more thoughts this morning? I'd love to hear from you. Know what you're thinking here, and maybe changes in your own voices or things that you've resisted. Maybe new vocal styles if you're a singer that you've resisted because you thought maybe you couldn't do it or it was too difficult and your voice is a certain way. We often come up against that, don't we? So how do we change then? Well, I've already mentioned that sometimes change is forced upon us, but how do we change if we want to plan to change something? Well, the first thing I would say is a bit at a time. Not all at once. We can't go from there to there. We need a gradient. We need to be able to do a little bit at a time to get towards that change, to get towards our goal. So our overall change that we're trying to make in our voice and in our life, if you want to look a bit wider than that, is our main goal. But we're going to have to affect lots of little changes along the way. And that might mean building new routines and making new habits. Habits are difficult because, it takes a bit of effort. but they're not so difficult if you can link them to something tangible. So, for instance, how do you remember to brush your teeth every morning? You remember because the toothbrush is in the bathroom next to the toothpaste, and when you go in there in the morning, that's what you see and you brush your teeth. How about if you link the changes that you want to make to something you do in your everyday life? I often say to people when I'm talking about, for instance, changing the breathing habits so that we've got a more efficient way of breathing. I might say, well, you can practice this when you are, for instance, just cooking in the kitchen, when you're washing up or stacking the dishwasher or whatever it happens to be around the house. You can do this in part of your everyday job. You can do it when you go for a walk with the dog. You can walk around doing a bit of if I just give that as an example. Those of you who've used that technique know what I'm on about. If you don't, I'll be very glad to go through it with you at some point if you want to get in touch. But yeah, take the pressure off yourself. Do it in bits. Put those new routines in and form habits by linking them to something else that you're doing. And then there's finding supporters. I think Facebook's great for that, isn't it? I was feeling miserable in the week going back to the sciatica, so I put a little post up and lots of people came on and gave me support and it made me feel better. And I think that's really positive. Again, you might be trying to learn a new piece. You might be going for an audition. You might be having to prepare a big speech of some kind. It helps to have supporters who'll listen to it for you, who'll give you honest feedback and will be there on your side. And in your turn, you can support others in the same way. Our voice use, is very linked to who we are in these ways. And if we feel supported and we feel guided, we're more likely to express ourselves fully in what we're doing and do a better job of it. Jackie says she finds it easier to teach things that have challenged her in the past because she's experienced the difficulties and learnt how to overcome them. Completely. I completely agree. We've had to make changes ourselves as teachers. And therefore, when it comes to helping other people, if we've struggled, if we've been through the pain of that change and come out of it at the other end, as it were, then we know how to help. We know what those people are going through. Finding the positive is so important and a real focus for me in my teaching, says Lindsay. Yeah, the positive, there's always a positive. There's always something that somebody is doing well. There's always something that we are doing well ourselves. I think very often we're very mean to ourselves. Oh, I'm no good, or I won't be able to do that, or I couldn't possibly do it. Why not? We have everything in us that we need. And I found that difficult to believe for a long time. But actually, it's true. If we just allow it to work, we have it inside us. I'm not saying don't be skilled, don't train. All of those things are vital. Preparation is vital. But then you have to trust yourself and actually allow yourself to come through and say, what is it that I do that's good? And then what is it that I could do with changing to just make the good things even better? It's a far more positive way to think about it than the other, with our voice, with our life, everything. So we have our supporters, we have our new routine that we're working at. Track it, measure it, make sure that the changes are happening. And if things happen along the way that you're not so happy about, if some of the changes aren't what you wanted or aren't helpful, then reframe them and learn. Oh, well, actually, when I tried to do that way, I found that the talk was too long and I couldn't actually keep people's attention for that long. So I'm going to do it the next time a different way. So it's about being positive and being constructive. So that was just a few thoughts on change today. If you've enjoyed it, do say so and do pop in with your comments. I have actually written a blog on this as well, and I'll put the link in the comments after the call so you could perhaps have a look. I said some slightly different things in there, but you might find that useful. And if you could give this recording or the blog or both a bit of a share, I'd be really grateful. It just helps it to be seen and to help more people. Very often people say to me, "Oh, I didn't realise you were live," or "I didn't realise you wrote a blog." And that's because, unfortunately, our friends at Facebook don't necessarily distribute them very widely. So we need our friends to help and support with that as well. And I'll do the same for you. And I hope you have a really great remainder of the Easter weekend with your families and friends, or on your own if you're having a bit of me time. Whatever you're doing, have a really great weekend. And thank you for joining me. And hopefully, I'll be back next week with more ideas for you. Take care and see you soon. Bye.